If you are under 50 years old and you're thinking about buying real estate, have you actually thought about it? Have you thought, recently, I'm going to buy real estate? Real estate is the dream. I've watched all these YouTube videos, and the smartest thing that I could do right now is to buy some real estate. So I got my start in real estate, and I think that's the stupidest thing anyone under the age of 50 could do. And in this video, I want to talk a little bit about why I think that is. And then, of course, I want to hear your opinion in the comments. And if you like the video, then please do subscribe. That's very, very important, because the faster you subscribe, the faster YouTube shares the video with other people that also need to be saved from the demonic curse of real estate. So why is real estate a demonic curse? Let's talk about this. So firstly, I got my start in real estate. I was negotiating new build property deals, and my job basically was to go to a property builder that was completely distressed, couldn't figure out how to sell the last 20 units, structure a deal to sell all of them within a space of 45 days or whatever the ending period of their sales cycle was, right? And what you learn during this period is that people are fucking addicted to real estate. People want to buy property. They've been ingrained into their brains that buying property is the best, most smartest thing that they could do, and they will not believe anything anyone tells them about doing so. And so I had to think about why. And also, my parents go through this too, right? They've got their start and their security and everything from property. So they love it. They love their property. They love their real estate. I just about managed to get them to refi and buy 1 Bitcoin for every property that they have. But before then, it was, no, Bitcoin sucks. It's all about real estate, et cetera, et cetera. So, there's a reason why real estate is the largest asset by market cap in the world. It has the highest stock to flow ratio of any asset, and it is an asset that has been regarded all around the world as the premier asset. If you get extremely wealthy, one of the best things that you can do is buy a bunch of property in areas that are exclusive, right? Like if you buy a penthouse in number 1 Hyde Park in London, you're saying something about yourself. But when did property become this asset that everyone should just pile into? Well, I have a couple theories about that, and that's what I want to talk about, really. Property, to me, is the worst asset when we are entering times of unrest, right? Property is loved by the people who are at threat of time of unrest, which is the governments and other people like that, because property allows you, as if I'm a government, I can incentivize you to put your money into property, and now you're under my control. If you buy a property, whether it's your own home or an investment, you are under my control, right? I can say that yes, you own that property, but if you ever cause any problems, there are so many legal loopholes where I can get involved and take control of that property until you behave well. And that's really an issue with property and real estate right now. And especially as we enter a world where, more and more control mechanisms are coming into the world, more and more control mechanisms like CBDCs and everything else are coming to the world faster than we could ever hope for. Trying to further invest into something that is easily controllable is ridiculous. Remember, if you don't think that they can control property prices, who controls interest rates? The governments. Who controls access to credit? The governments. Who controls the ability to build property or not? The governments. And so, of course, it makes sense that in the U.S., they'd give you a 1031 exchange agreement where, you don't have to, you can defer your taxes as long as the money goes straight back into property, because it is fixed. You can't just leave, right? They don't want you putting that money into watches or Bitcoin because, you can just pick up and leave, and there's no control over you as a subjugate of the empire under which you are choosing to live. So real estate, that is the point of real estate. It is designed as an asset. It is believed that real estate protects you against inflation. That is an absolute lie. That is an absolute lie. But the point of real estate is the main point of real estate, and why every country, every major country in the world has tax incentives for you to invest in real estate, because the money stays within the borders of the country. The money is secured, and if at any point you misbehave like a bad little boy, I can send the government agents with a court order to take control of your property. At some point of wealth, you're going to have to buy some property. But until then, I don't think buying property is the smartest thing to do, especially right now when you have to actually consider what your other options are. Now, that's the conspiracy side of it, right? Well, before we finish that, property prices have a cap because a government needs people to have a roof over their head in order to vote for them. So property will be the first thing to be attacked. Like Canada started banning, foreign investors from buying property, etc., because the property prices were just too high. They need to keep people happy, because if they don't keep people happy, unfortunately, with the systems that we live in, the little pesky problem of having a democracy means that I've actually got to keep the peasants happy so that they vote for me. So in order to do that, property is going to be one of those levers that is used, right? Property, I firmly believe, right, especially after the flu season that we had in 2020, I firmly believe that if you give someone a roof over their head, some food in their stomach, and an education for their children, or now for their dogs and cats, they'll do whatever you want them to do. It's as simple as that. They will do whatever you want them to do. So property is one of those levers that they can hold. Now, let's look at the money-making side of property. Property has not kept up with inflation, no matter what anyone says. It has kept up with the published price index that is out there. And certainly people look like they're getting richer through investing in real estate. But in reality, they're not, because if you value property prices against the amount of debasement that's happened right now, on the 2nd of September 2023, we are touching 2008 lows in terms of value. So if you wanted to create value rather than just price appreciation, it has not worked. It has not worked. Real estate and property has not created you more value. It has created you higher prices, and therefore you look happy. And what do I mean by that? It's very, very simple. What I mean is, if the total money supply was $100 and your property portfolio was worth $1 of that $100, your property portfolio controlled 1% of the money supply. What they've done is taken that money supply to $300 and told you that your property is now worth $1.80. So what that means is that your property price, the price of your property's gone up, and you look happy, and everyone around you congratulates you like the Mitch McConnells that they are, standing there like NPCs clapping for everyone who gets involved in property, not realizing that your wealth is actually being stolen from you through the value mechanisms of debasement. And the reason why this can happen is very simple, because they control both the levers. They control the demand lever and they control the supply lever. The unique thing about Bitcoin is that Bitcoin, the supply lever cannot move no matter what happens to the demand lever. It's the first asset in human history where no matter what we try and incentivize through demand, we cannot affect supply. That's why the scarcity is the single most important thing about Bitcoin. So when it comes to property, yes, you can absolutely, I think everyone should own a home, and I think everyone should do that. I personally don't at this moment in time, because I'm still deciding where I want to live in the world. And eventually, I would say in the next approximately 5 years, I'll be buying 3 homes around the world, and that will be my limit, because and they're going to be for me. I'm not going to be buying investment property anymore. And when it comes to making money, a lot of people think they're making money, but the money that you're making in property is due to the credit expansion. So the entire amount of money that you make is dependent on the governments that say, yes, we're going to expand this credit or not. And even then, if so many people own property and you see the prices of your property go up, have you actually made money if everyone's making the same money? I don't think so. So the people that do make money with property, how they're doing it is very, very simple. They're leveraging to the hilt, and that's the only way if you increase the percentage leverage, you increase the percentage return on the asset, and they're doing it mainly with other people's money for other people, and therefore they have an infinite return on property. That's fine. If you want to get into property and that's what I did. If you want to get into property and your idea of getting into property is, I'm not going to use any of my own money, I'm going to use other people's money, I'm going to facilitate their desire to get into property, and I'm then going to take the profit I make from that and put it into Bitcoin, completely fine. That's absolutely fine. That's running a property business. That's not investing in property. What I'm talking about is someone's got $500,000, $1 million, $2 million in the bank, and their first thought is, I'm going to leverage that 3x and get into property because someone on the internet said it's a good idea. You're going to lose, because not only do you have the competition, the challenges of getting into property. You have to find the right deals, you have to talk to the right people. Everyone is a shark in the property game. Because when I was in property and I had a good deal, I could tell no one about it until there was an NDA signed and other stuff involved with securing that property deal. So if you find out about a deal and you're not a big player, there's a reason why you're finding out about it, because somebody else passed on it. And that's fine. That's how the food chain works. Sometimes you just have to be okay with that until you get to a certain level, and that's part of the game. But it's much easier just to buy Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the ultimate property, and so it should be the choice. So if you've got that money sitting in the bank and you're going, I'm going to get involved in real estate, I'm going to go buy a bunch of property, I'm going to generate this cash flow. Oh, the latest thing that I heard, it's from a friend of mine, he said, I'm going to take this money, I'm going to buy property, I'm going to take the cash flow that comes out of the property and buy the Bitcoin. This is the stupidest thing on earth, because while it makes sense on surface, it is a very old fiat mindset, a way of doing things. You're going to take that $100,000 or whatever it's going to take, put it into property, right? You're then now going to take a 12%, if you can get lucky, depending on the type of property you're buying, right? Because if you're buying growth property in the UK, for example, or anywhere in the main cities of the US, your yields are going to be 4%, 5%. If you're buying non-growth property, then your yields are going to be 12%. Right? So we can look at both of these examples because they're both retarded. If we look at the growth property example, you've got a 4% yield that you're now putting into Bitcoin. So if you've got £1 million invested, and you're generating a growth, a 4% yield, you're making 40,000 that you're putting into Bitcoin every single year, and it's split over the months. Instead, what you could be doing is taking that million, putting it straight into Bitcoin and compounding at 80% a year. You will never catch up. You will never ever catch up with that free income. If people say it's free income I'm putting in, it's not fucking free income. There's an opportunity cost of that million that you had to put into the deal. So that's the growth property example. Then you have the cash flow property example where you're making 12% a year. You got $1 million putting into property, you're making 120 a year. Right? 120 a year sounds better than 40 a year. But you got to remember, the million is compounding at 80% CAGR. And then you don't have... So either way, it's just dumb, right, to do it. It's just dumb. It doesn't make sense. Subject to you understanding Bitcoin. So that's what's important. There has to be the understanding gap that has to be filled here as to what Bitcoin is. Property feels like a safer asset because people have known it for longer. My parents have been involved in property for 35, 40 years. They know property. It's deep inside of them. They know and understand it. There's other families that have had property in their bloodline for, 4 generations, 5 generations. I'm not here to try and tell you that I'm going to convince you to get out of property. That's not going to happen. Here's what I am saying. In the future, the capital that you're thinking of investing into property may want to consider taking a percentage of that and putting it into Bitcoin. What this video is for someone who's been working your ass off in a good job. You've built some capital up. You've got $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, whatever it is. Maybe you sold a business, whatever it is, and you're going, I'm going to get into property because that's what YouTube told me to do. You're an idiot. You're an idiot. Because you're going to be missing out on the scarcest asset on earth, You're going to be missing out on 80% CAGR returns just for what? Dealing with volatility? Oh, then the next question is, but property generates me a cash flow. So when someone says that, what they're actually admitting is that they have no idea how to do financial planning. Because the point of the cash flow is so that you can pay your expenses. Well, if you just take the time to understand Bitcoin, you can understand that at certain points in the Bitcoin cycle, you need to liquidate a certain amount of Bitcoin or borrow against it or whatever you want to do to pay for your expenses. But people don't have these planned lives. They're bad at financial planning. So what they want to do is buy property, send the problem away, and then get the problem to send them income, and then they can set a limit on a monthly basis. I can set a limit for myself. This is how much I'm going to spend this month. It's not that hard, right? But unfortunately, the fiat system has incentivized us to be really bad at financial planning, and therefore we want to get involved with all of these old school investments that basically we become dependent on. Then you got the idea that property is actually a job, right? Unless you are buying a commercial sized deal where you've got, 20 to 50 units and you're going to have a management agent and all this other stuff, most of you guys are going to be thinking, I'm going to buy that property, I'm going to paint it, I'm going to do this, that, and the other, I'm going to flip it, or I'm going to rent it out, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're having these wet dreams. But really what's going to happen is you're going to hate your life. You're going to take time away from your family and your children. You're going to take focus away from the job that actually made that money in the first place. And then you're going to get into a property that's going to underperform and steal your wealth from under your feet. It doesn't make sense. All in the meantime, while we've got Bitcoin, which is the hardest, most scarcest asset on earth that has ever been discovered, going through its main adoption phase. Real estate's not in its main adoption phase. Real estate is in the phase of, okay, well, pretty much everyone owns it. Now what do we do? That's real estate, right? Bitcoin's going through its adoption phase. Everyone is starting to own it. Everyone's trying to figure out how it works. Everyone's starting to figure out how they can be involved in Bitcoin. And you're sitting here going, I want to invest in real estate, which everyone owns, and I'm gonna voluntarily screw myself by allowing the system to steal my wealth and the future of my children. There's more people today in property that thought they were doing the right thing, which is the same story of my parents, thought they were doing the right thing. Now, 30 years later, they're sitting there going, why isn't my property portfolio giving me the life that I thought it would? Why do I have to still downscale my life even though I did the right thing and invest in property? That's the reality of most property investors. Why? Because they didn't think about debasement. They only thought about prices. They only thought about price index. So while while real estate has beaten the price index, it has not protected you against the debasement of the currency. So that's what's happened. You got all of these hurdles involved with buying property every single step of the way. You got to buy the property, you got to find the property, you got to do the deal, you got to close on the deal, then you got to maintain the property, then you got to rent the property, then you got to deal with the tenant that you rent it to. It is a full-time job. It is not going... And by the way, most property investors today, if they actually paid themselves a wage for taking care of all that, their property portfolio would be at a negative, if a break even, if not a negative. Right? If you actually paid yourself what you think you are worth for the hours that you are putting in, your property portfolio cash flow is probably sitting at a negative. So there are many, many bad reasons why you should not invest in real estate. But it is the asset. It is the darling asset that everyone thinks. Yeah, it's a darling asset when you own, an apartment in number 1 Hyde Park, right? Or Park Avenue, right? Whatever the main building unit is called in Park Avenue. That's when or you own oceanfront property in Malibu. That's a darling asset. You buying homes that people can just live in and then screwing yourself up over buying the hardest asset that humanity has ever created because you think you're going to get a higher ROI, not factoring in your own time, that's called being stupid. So be prudent with your decision making and be prudent with what's going to happen here. And the only reason most people are still buying property instead of buying Bitcoin is because they don't understand what Bitcoin actually is, which is why I set up this YouTube channel and I want you to subscribe to it because we need to get this message out there. Take the time to understand what Bitcoin is. It is extremely important, and it is the most important asset that humanity has ever created, because it is the scarcity. That's the reason why you're buying the property. The scarcity is why you're buying stocks. The scarcity is why you're buying gold. And if you can get to that understanding, you realize that Bitcoin is the scarcest asset humanity has ever created. And you have to own it. If you are under 50 and you are thinking about buying a property, whether it is your own home or whether it is investment property, etc., and you're not at 1 Bitcoin, you are a moron. You need to get to 1 Bitcoin first. You think buying the property is going to secure your children's future? It's not. It's not. Because my parents did property for 40 years and it has not secured mine or my brother's future. That's no hit against them. It's how the system works. The system is designed to get you to slave away, earn the money that you need to earn by being a doctor, being a lawyer, having a job, being a construction worker, being a police officer, whatever it is. And then it forces you to speculate and take the risks so that they can capture 95% of your wealth back into the system. So property is not the darling asset that everyone thinks it is. There is only one darling asset, and that is Bitcoin. Property is bad on many, many, many levels. It is certainly not the freedom asset that most people talk about. Unless you are doing what some of the bigger people are doing, which is taking the money from a bunch of people, getting into commercial deals, having management agents there with the view to flip that deal to a big conglomerate that wants to come up and buy the property portfolio that they have created. That's different. That's doing property as a service. I'm talking about actually owning property. It's very, very different. So take this second to think about real estate. If you got any questions, please leave them in the comments. Please subscribe to the channel, because I think that's extremely important. If you think that the message is important, then the best thing you can do is subscribe to the YouTube, because the more, subscribe to YouTube, follow me on Twitter. The more people that subscribe, the faster YouTube shows the video to other people. So I really appreciate it in advance. And remember, no matter what you think about property, there are still only 3 rules to Bitcoin, and that's rule number 1. Step number 1, you buy Bitcoin. Step number 2, you shut the fuck up. And step number 3, you get fabulously wealthy.